My name is Carly and I just turned 34 last month. I had been looking forward to our monthly family dinner for weeks. Despite our rocky relationship, I was hopeful my dad would finally acknowledge my writing career. Instead, he made a joke at my expense that left everyone laughing except me. The betrayal I felt watching my entire family join in on my humiliation was crushing. So, I quietly left. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you've ever felt like the odd one out in your own family, give this a like and subscribe to know what happened when I finally chose myself. To understand why that dinner hurt so deeply, you need to know about my family. We're what most would consider a successful middle-class family from Boston. My father Thomas built his reputation as a cutthroat corporate attorney known for his sharp wit in the courtroom and unfortunately at our dinner table too. My mother Diana, always elegant and proper, spent her life being the perfect attorney's wife, hosting dinner parties and supporting Dad's career. She gave up her dreams of becoming a journalist to raise us. I'm the youngest of 3 children. My oldest brother Brian, now 40, followed directly in Dad's footsteps. Law degree from Harvard, partner at a prestigious firm by 35, married to his college sweetheart with 2 perfect children. He was always Dad's pride and joy, the son who could do no wrong. Then there's my middle brother Jack, 38, who became a cardiologist. While he didn't choose law, medicine was an acceptable profession in my father's eyes. Jack saves lives, makes great money, and gives my parents bragging rights at their country club. He married a pediatrician and they live in a beautiful colonial-style house just 20 minutes from my parents. And then there's me, Carly Andrews, 34, the disappointment. At least, that's how my father sees me. I studied English literature at Boston University, much to my father's dismay. He called it a waste of money and potential. When I graduated and told him I wanted to be a writer, he laughed and asked when I was going to get a real job. That was 12 years ago, and his opinion hasn't changed. For the past decade, I've worked as a freelance writer. I've written for several respected publications, maintained a blog with a decent following, and have been working on my first novel for the past 3 years. It's never been enough for my father. In his world, success means a corner office, a 6-figure salary, and tangible status symbols. My passion for storytelling doesn't register as legitimate on his success meter. Our monthly family dinners started 5 years ago, when my mother worried we were drifting apart as a family. Every first Sunday of the month, we gather at my parents' home in Beacon Hill. Mom cooks an elaborate meal. Dad pours expensive wine, and we pretend to be the perfect family for about 3 hours. These dinners usually follow the same pattern. Brian talks about his latest big case, Jack discusses an interesting medical procedure. Dad boasts about his golf game or a new client, and Mom keeps the peace. When it's my turn to share, Dad usually checks his watch or refills his drink. Despite this predictable pattern, I still found myself hoping each month would be different. That maybe my father would show some interest in my life or offer a word of encouragement. I'm not entirely sure why I kept subjecting myself to this ritual of disappointment. Perhaps it was for my mother's sake, or maybe some childish part of me still craved my father's approval. This particular dinner in April, I had news I was genuinely excited about. After years of rejection letters, an editor at a respected publishing house had expressed serious interest in my manuscript. She'd sent me encouraging feedback and requested some revisions before making a final decision. It wasn't a book deal yet, but it was the closest I'd come, and I was thrilled. For once, I felt like I had something my father might actually be impressed by. I spent extra time getting ready that evening. I wore a new navy blue dress, styled my auburn hair, and even applied makeup, something I rarely bothered with. In the car ride over, I rehearsed how I would share my news. I imagined my father's face lighting up with pride, finally seeing that my persistence in pursuing writing was paying off. Looking back now, I realize how naive that hope was. But hope is often blind, especially when it comes to family. The drive to my parents' house was familiar. The stately brownstones of Beacon Hill never failed to impress me, even after all these years. My parents' home, with its pristine facade and meticulously maintained window boxes, stood as a testament to their commitment to appearances. I parked my modest Honda between Brian's Mercedes and Jack's Audi, a physical representation of our varying levels of success in my father's eyes. As I walked up to the front door, I took a deep breath, clutching my phone with the editor's email like it was a winning lottery ticket. Tonight would be different, I told myself. Tonight, Dad would finally see me. The aroma of my mother's famous pot roast greeted me as I entered the house. The dining room table was set with the good china crystal glasses sparkling under the chandelier light. My brothers had already arrived with their wives, and everyone was enjoying pre-dinner drinks in the living room. Dad stood by the fireplace, tumbler of scotch in hand, deep in conversation with Brian about some legal precedent. Jack and his wife Lisa were showing Mom pictures of their recent vacation to Italy on their phones. My sister-in-law, Amanda, Brian's wife, was the first to notice me. Amanda hurried over to hug me. Despite being married to my extremely conventional brother, she had always been kind to me. Her eyes sparkled with genuine warmth. She whispered, "You look lovely tonight. Something special going on?" I nodded slightly, not wanting to share my news before the proper time. Just felt like dressing up a bit. Mom finally looked up from the vacation photos. "Carly, darling, come in, come in. I was starting to worry you might not make it." I kissed her cheek. "Sorry I'm a few minutes late. Traffic on Starro Drive was awful." Dad barely glanced up from his conversation. The scotch in his glass had already been substantially depleted. He simply nodded in acknowledgement of my arrival before continuing his discussion with Brian. Dinner was served 20 minutes later. We took our usual seats, Dad at the head of the table, Mom at the opposite end. The food was delicious as always. Mom had outdone herself with the pot roast, garlic mashed potatoes, and roasted vegetables. The conversation flowed easily at first, centered around safe topics like the unseasonably warm spring weather and an upcoming charity gala my parents were attending. When Brian mentioned winning a difficult case, Dad beamed with pride. "That's my boy, always knew you had it in you to take down those corporate giants." Another toast to the best damn attorney in Boston. Everyone raised their glasses, and I noticed how Brian's chest puffed up slightly at the praise. Jack's turn came next with news about a complicated surgery he'd performed that saved a 12-year-old boy. Again, Dad was effusive in his praise. "That's incredible, son. You're doing God's work there. Saving lives every day." The familiar pattern was unfolding exactly as it always did. Then inevitably the attention turned to me. "So Carly," Mom said kindly, "what's new with you? How's the writing going?" I took a deep breath. This was my moment. "Actually, I have some exciting news. My novel, the one I've been working on for the past 3 years. An editor from Horizon Publishing is interested. She's asked for some revisions, but she said she thinks it has real potential." I pulled out my phone and added I got her email last week. She specifically mentioned how much she loved the character development and the unique voice. She thinks it could do really well in the current market. The table fell silent. I looked around expectantly, waiting for the congratulations, the questions, the excitement. Mom smiled cautiously. "That sounds promising, dear." Lisa, Jack's wife, said, "That's wonderful, Carly. What's your book about again?" Before I could answer, my father cleared his throat. I looked at him, still hopeful. His face was unreadable at first. Then his lips curled into what I now recognize as a dismissive smirk. "My daughter thinks she's a writer," he announced to the table. "But who would have thought someone would actually pay her to keep a diary?" The laughter started with Brian, then spread around the table. Even my mother gave a small chuckle, though she had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable afterward. Jack tried to hide his smile behind his wine glass. Only Amanda remained straight-faced, shooting me a sympathetic glance. "That wasn't what I said, Dad," I replied, my voice smaller than I intended. "It's not a diary. It's a novel about a woman who discovers her family's hidden past and has to confront some difficult truths about her heritage." Thomas waved his hand dismissively. "Same difference. People writing about made-up problems when there are real ones to solve." He looked at Brian. "Remember when she used to write those little stories as a kid, always in her own world? Brian nodded, adding fuel to the fire. I still have the one you wrote about the talking dog who became president. He laughed again, looking at his wife. She kept it in a binder with unicorn stickers all over it. It felt like they were talking about a child, not a 34-year-old professional writer. The dismissal was so complete, so casual, that it took my breath away. My exciting news had been reduced to a childhood hobby, something cute but ultimately inconsequential. What stung most wasn't just my father's mockery, but how readily everyone joined in. My mother, who had encouraged my reading as a child, my brothers who once asked me to tell them bedtime stories when our parents were out, they all laughed along with my father, unified in the joke at my expense. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. The editor's email, which had made me so proud just hours before, now seemed like a cruel joke. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe I was fooling myself, pretending to be something I wasn't. I placed my napkin beside my half-finished plate. The conversation had already moved on, as if my news and their dismissal of it was just a minor interlude in the real business of the evening. Dad was now talking about his golf game, and no one seemed to notice my silence. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I need to use the restroom." No one even acknowledged me as I stood up. In the hallway bathroom, I stared at my reflection, seeing not the confident woman who had arrived with hopes high, but the little girl who could never quite measure up to her father's expectations. The little girl who kept trying anyway, decade after decade. I made a decision then, looking into my own eyes in that mirror. I wouldn't cry. Not here, not where they could see or hear me. I walked back to the dining room, grabbed my purse from the back of my chair, and simply said, "I just remembered I have a deadline tomorrow morning. I should go." "Thanks for dinner, Mom." Mom looked surprised. "Already? But we haven't had dessert. I made your favorite apple crisp." Dad didn't even look up from his plate. "Deadlines. Right. For the diary." More laughter rippled around the table. I didn't wait for it to subside. I didn't say another word. I simply walked out, closing the front door quietly behind me. As I got into my car, I could still hear them laughing through the open dining room window. Driving home that night, tears finally came. They weren't just for what had happened at dinner, but for a lifetime of similar moments that suddenly came flooding back. The dismissals, the jokes at my expense, the constant message that who I was and what I loved wasn't good enough. I remembered being 16 and winning first place in a statewide writing competition. The ceremony was on a Thursday evening, and I had begged my father to attend. He had a golf game that ran long, he explained later. He couldn't just leave in the middle. Brian had a college interview the next day, and Jack had an exam to study for. Only my mother came, sitting alone in a sea of proud parents. When I got home with my certificate and price check, Dad was watching a baseball game. He glanced at my certificate and said, "That's nice, honey," before turning back to the TV. The next morning he spent breakfast talking about Brian's interview prospects. Then there was my 16th birthday. Dad had forgotten about it entirely until Mom reminded him at breakfast. He promised to be home early for the small family dinner Mom had planned. He arrived 2 hours late after the candles on my cake had melted down and the dinner had gone cold. His excuse was a client emergency, but his breath smelt of whiskey. The real insult came when he handed me my gift, a set of LSAT prep books. "But I want to study literature," I had protested. His response was cutting. "Your brother had already been accepted to law school by your age. You need to start thinking about a real career, not this book nonsense." I remembered my college graduation from Boston University. I had graduated summa cum laude with a degree in English literature. As we walked back to the car after the ceremony, my father said, 4 years and $30,000 for a degree that won't get you a job. At least Jack and Brian got something useful out of college. That night he gave Brian and Jack expensive watches to celebrate my graduation. It was their accomplishment too, he explained, since they had mentored me through college. I received a journal from the university bookstore. My mother had picked it out. Then there was the time I published my first major article in a national magazine. I was 27, and I'd spent months researching and writing a piece about the historical architecture of Boston and its preservation efforts. When I showed my father the magazine, he flipped through it quickly. "Well, it's not the New Yorker, but I suppose it's a start," he said. Then he pointed to a typo the editors had missed. "You might want to be more careful with your proofreading next time." Every accomplishment diminished, every milestone tainted by his disapproval. And through it all, my mother's silent complicity, my brother's casual acceptance of our father's behavior as normal. I thought about how my father evaluated everyone based on their material success and status, how he introduced Brian to his colleagues with a detailed list of his accomplishments, while I was simply his daughter who writes. He measured worth in dollars earned and prestigious titles with no room for passion or creativity unless they resulted in fame or fortune. Even my mother, with her own abandoned dreams of journalism, had accepted this value system. She had given up her career aspirations for the family, a sacrifice my father referenced whenever he wanted to emphasize his own importance. "Look at what your mother gave up for us," he would say, as if her dreams had been trivial compared to his career. My brothers had succeeded within this framework, but at what cost? Brian worked 80-hour weeks and had missed most of his children's milestones. Jack was on his second marriage, the first having failed due to his constant absence at the hospital. They were successful by our father's definition, but I wondered if they were happy. As I drove through the darkened streets of Boston, I realized I had spent my entire life trying to earn my father's approval. Every story I wrote, every publication I secured, every positive review I received, I had secretly hoped would finally be enough to make him see me as successful, to make him proud. But that night, watching everyone laugh at his dismissal of my potential book deal, something broke inside me. I finally understood that nothing would ever be enough. I could win a Pulitzer Prize, and he would find a way to diminish it. I could become a best-selling author, and he would credit luck rather than talent or hard work. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside just yet. I sat in my car, the engine off, streetlights casting shadows across the dashboard. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of the pain I had been carrying, the hurt child within me, who still desperately wanted her father's love and approval, the adult who knew rationally that I should have stopped seeking it long ago. I had built my entire identity around proving him wrong, showing him that writing was a valid career, that my choices were legitimate. But in doing so, I had given him power over my self-worth. I had allowed his metrics of success to be the yardstick by which I measured myself. Sitting there in my car, I made a promise to myself. This would be the last time I let my father's opinion define me, the last time I gave him the power to make me feel small. I was 34 years old, and it was time to stop being my father's daughter and start being fully myself. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying not just the dinner but years of similar interactions. By morning, I had reached a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I needed distance from my family to heal and redefine myself on my own terms. My first action was something I'd considered many times but never had the courage to do. I changed my phone number. It was a small act of self-protection, but it felt monumental. No more anxious checking of my phone after family gatherings, no more hurtful texts from my father disguised as jokes, no more missed calls from my mother that left me feeling guilty for days. Next, I emailed my landlord to inform him I wouldn't be renewing my lease the following month. My apartment was only 15 minutes from my parents' house, and the proximity had always made it easy for them to drop by unannounced. Usually, it was my mother stopping by with leftover food or household items. She thought I needed small gestures that came with subtle criticisms about my lifestyle or decor. I spent the morning researching apartments in Cambridge, across the river and far enough away to require actual planning for visits. By afternoon, I had scheduled 3 viewings for the following day. The rentals were slightly above my budget, but I had been saving for a while, living frugally while freelancing. It was time to use that money for my well-being rather than just emergencies. That evening, I opened my laptop and stared at the email from the editor at Horizon Publishing. The dinner had nearly made me forget about it, but now I read her words again. She truly did love my manuscript. Her suggestions for revisions were thoughtful and aligned with my vision for the book. This wasn't charity or luck, as my father had implied. This was the result of years of hard work and dedication to my craft. I worked through the night on those revisions, fueled by a new determination. This book wasn't just a story anymore. It was my declaration of independence. By dawn, I had completed half of the requested changes, and the manuscript was already stronger for it. I emailed the editor to let her know I was working on the revisions and would have them completed within 2 weeks ahead of her requested deadline. The next day, after viewing apartments, I found a charming one-bedroom in a converted Victorian house near Harvard Square. The rent was steep, but the space had character with bay windows, perfect for reading and writing, hardwood floors and built-in bookshelves. I signed the lease on the spot using most of my savings for the security deposit and first month's rent. As I was leaving the building, I noticed a flyer for a support group that met in a community center nearby. Healing from Family Trauma, Building Healthier Relationships. Something about the timing felt significant. I took a photo of the flyer with my phone, and later that evening, sent an email inquiring about joining. Within days, I had hired movers and packed up my apartment. I didn't tell anyone in my family about the move. My mother had called my old number several times, leaving voicemails that ranged from confused to concerned. My brothers had each sent texts asking if I was upset about something. My father predictably had made no attempt to contact me. I attended my first support group meeting the week I moved into my new apartment. Sitting in a circle with 8 strangers, I felt oddly at home. As each person shared their story, I recognized pieces of my own experience. The constant criticism disguised as concern. The impossible standards. The feeling of never being enough. When it was my turn to speak, I surprised myself by how readily the words came. I talked about the dinner, but also about the years of dismissal and disapproval. About living in the shadow of my successful brothers. About my mother's failure to protect me from my father's criticism. About my own complicity in allowing this dynamic to continue well into my 30s. No one interrupted me. No one diminished my feelings or told me I was overreacting. Instead, I received nods of understanding, tissues for my tears. And most importantly, validation that what I had experienced was genuine emotional harm, not mere family squabbles as I'd been led to believe. Through the group, I got a referral to a therapist named Shannon who specialized in family trauma. Our first session was difficult. Shannon asked questions no one had ever asked me before. When did you first notice your father treated you differently than your brothers? How did your mother respond when your father criticized you? What would you say to your younger self if you could go back in time? These sessions were painful but clarifying. Shannon helped me understand that my father's treatment wasn't my fault. His inability to value my choices reflected his limitations, not mine. She introduced me to concepts like emotional neglect and conditional love that helped me contextualize my experiences. As weeks passed, I built a new routine. Mornings were spent on my manuscript revisions. Afternoons were for freelance work to pay the bills. Evenings were for therapy, support group meetings, or quiet time in my new apartment surrounded by my books and the peace of not waiting for my phone to ring with a family obligation or criticism. I also began building what Shannon called my chosen family. I reconnected with college friends I had drifted away from, many of whom lived in Cambridge. I joined a writers group that met weekly at a local bookstore. I volunteered at a literacy program teaching adults to read. Slowly, I created a community that valued me for exactly who I was. 3 weeks after the fateful dinner, I completed the revisions to my manuscript and sent them to the editor. 2 days later, she called with the news I had been waiting years to hear. Horizon Publishing wanted to offer me a book deal. It wasn't a huge advance, but it was enough to validate my years of work and sacrifice. Most importantly, it was a real publisher who believed in my voice and my story. In the past, my first instinct would have been to call my family, still hoping for that elusive approval. Instead, I celebrated with my writers group, who took me out for champagne and truly understood what this milestone meant. For the first time in my adult life, I experienced an achievement untainted by my father's dismissal or my own need for his validation. It was during this celebration that I received an unexpected text from an unfamiliar number. It was from Brian, sent through his wife Amanda's phone since I wasn't responding to his. "We need to talk. The family is worried. Please call Mom at least." I stared at the message for a long time, surrounded by my new friends, my glass of champagne untouched. This was the moment of truth. Would I get pulled back into the old patterns, or could I maintain the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish? I replied simply, I'm taking some time for myself. I'm safe and well. Please respect my space. Then I put the phone away and rejoined the celebration, determined not to let family drama overshadow this important moment. The old Carly would have spent the rest of the evening anxiously checking her phone and feeling guilty. The new Carly ordered another round of champagne and proposed a toast to new beginnings. 3 weeks of silence from me had apparently thrown my family into unfamiliar territory. They were used to me being the accommodating one. The one who always answered calls promptly, who showed up to every family function regardless of how I was treated. My absence had created a void they didn't know how to handle. The text messages increased in frequency and urgency. My mother left tearful voicemails on my old disconnected number. We are so worried about you, Carly. Whatever happened, we can work it out as a family. Please call us. According to Brian, she had driven to my old apartment twice only to find I no longer lived there. My father predictably refused to reach out directly. According to the messages from my brothers, he maintained that I was just being dramatic. She always was sensitive, Brian reported him saying. She'll get over it and be back when she needs something. His dismissal of my feelings was so typical that it almost made me laugh. Even in my absence, he couldn't acknowledge that he might have hurt me. It was always my fault for being too sensitive, never his fault for being cruel. Jack, my middle brother, seemed genuinely confused by my disappearance. His messages showed a man trying to understand something outside his experience. Was it something Dad said at dinner? He makes those jokes all the time. It's just how he shows affection. This was the family mythology we had all been raised with. Dad's cutting remarks were just jokes. His criticism was tough love, his dismissal was motivation. Brian took a more direct approach. Always the lawyer, he treated my absence like a case to be solved. He contacted mutual friends, checked social media for clues, and even drove around neighborhoods I had mentioned liking in the past. His persistence paid off when he ran into my college roommate Julia at a coffee shop in Harvard Square. She had been helping me set up my new apartment and mentioned seeing him there. That evening I received another text from Amanda's phone. I know where you are. We need to talk. I'll be at Pembroke Coffee on Mass Avenue tomorrow at Zweita, please come. Just me, no one else. I debated ignoring the message but decided it was time to face at least one member of my family. I had been working with Shannon on setting boundaries and communicating my needs clearly. This would be my first real test. Brian was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner with 2 coffees on the table. He stood when he saw me, his expression a mixture of relief and annoyance. The lawyer in him couldn't help but take control of the situation. You had us worried sick, he said as I sat down. Mom's barely sleeping. What were you thinking, just disappearing like that? I took a deep breath, remembering Shannon's advice. Focus on your feelings, not their reactions. I needed some space. I said simply. After what happened at dinner, I realized I needed to step back from the family dynamic for my own mental health. Brian looked genuinely confused. What happened at dinner? Dad made a joke about your writing like he always does. You usually laugh it off. That's the problem, I said, meeting his eyes directly. I've been laughing it off for years, pretending it doesn't hurt when Dad dismisses something that's deeply important to me. When all of you join in, it feels like a betrayal. Brian shifted uncomfortably. He's just being Dad. You know he doesn't mean anything by it. Doesn't he? I countered. Think about it, Brian. How does Dad talk about your career? How does he introduce you to his friends? Now think about how he talks about mine. I watched my brother's face as he processed this. There was a flicker of recognition before his defenses went back up. That's different. I'm a lawyer. It's a profession he understands and respects. So I don't deserve respect because I chose a different path, I asked quietly. That's not what I meant, he backpedaled. But you have to admit, writing isn't exactly a stable career. Dad worries about you. I laughed not unkindly. Dad doesn't worry about me, Brian. He worries about how my choices reflect on him. There's a big difference. Brian ran a hand through his hair. Gesture. So like our father, it was almost eerie. So you changed your number and moved because your feelings were hurt. Don't you think that's a bit extreme? This was the moment I had been preparing for in therapy. The moment to speak my truth without apology or minimization. I looked my brother directly in the eyes. This isn't about one dinner or one joke, Brian. It's about 34 years of being made to feel like I'm not good enough, not successful enough, not the right kind of daughter. It's about Dad's constant criticism and Mom's silent enabling. It's about you and Jack going along with it because it's easier than standing up to him. I've spent my whole life trying to earn Dad's approval, and I finally realized I never will. So no, I don't think it's extreme to remove myself from a situation that has been damaging my self-worth for decades. The coffee shop around us seemed to fade away as Brian stared at me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time. The confident attorney was momentarily speechless. I've got a book deal, by the way, I added. That thing Dad laughed at. That editor really did want my manuscript. Horizon Publishing is releasing it next year. Brian's eyes widened slightly. That's great, Carly. Congratulations. Have you told Dad? I shook my head. No, and I don't plan to right now. I'm done seeking his approval or bracing for his criticism. I'm writing this book for me, not for him. So what now? Brian asked, his voice softer than before. You're just not going to be part of the family anymore. I'm taking a break from the family dynamic, I clarified. I need time to heal and establish healthier boundaries. When and if I come back, it will be on different terms. What terms? He asked, the lawyer and him needing specifics. I won't tolerate being belittled or dismissed. I won't pretend Dad's behavior isn't hurtful just to keep the peace. I won't participate in family gatherings that leave me feeling worse about myself. And I need all of you, not just Dad, to recognize your role in this dynamic. Brian's defensive posture returned. So this is all our fault. You're not responsible for any of this. I'm responsible for allowing it to continue for so long, I acknowledged. For not standing up for myself, for seeking approval at the cost of my own self-respect. But I'm not responsible for Dad's behavior or for the fact that none of you ever challenged it. That landed hard. I saw Brian flinch slightly before his legal training reasserted itself. So what do you want me to tell the family? Tell them what I told you. I'm safe, I'm well, and I'm taking the time I need. When I'm ready to have a conversation about how we move forward as a family, I'll reach out. He nodded slowly, not entirely convinced, but at least hearing me. As we prepared to leave, he asked one final question. Are you really okay, Carly? For the first time in our adult relationship, I felt like he was genuinely asking, not just going through the motions. I'm getting there, I said honestly, and that's something I need to do on my own right now. The meeting with Brian had gone better than I expected, but what I didn't anticipate was the fallout it would create within the family. Later that evening, I received a text from Jack. Dad and Brian got into a huge argument about you. Never seen anything like it. Apparently Brian had returned to my parents' house and repeated what I had said, including my feelings about how I had been treated by the family. According to Jack, our father had dismissed my concerns completely, calling me ungrateful and oversensitive. That was when Brian, to everyone's shock including his own, had defended me. You don't get it, Dad, Jack reported him saying. We've all been letting you talk to Carly like she's a disappointment her entire life. Maybe it's time we stopped. This had triggered the biggest family argument in memory. My mother had cried, my father had shouted, and Jack had tried unsuccessfully to mediate. The family dinner the following Sunday had been cancelled for the first time in 5 years. Part of me felt guilty for causing such disruption, but another part, the stronger part, now recognized that sometimes systems need to be disrupted to change. The comfortable family dynamic had been maintained at the cost of my emotional well-being for years. Perhaps this uncomfortable confrontation was long overdue. Shannon agreed when I discussed it in our next therapy session. Systems resist change, she explained. Your family has operated with certain roles and rules for decades. You changing your role forces everyone else to adjust, and that's uncomfortable, but discomfort is often where growth happens. The next few weeks were quiet. I immersed myself in finalizing my book contract, setting up my new home, and continuing my healing work. No more texts came from my brothers, and I assumed they were giving me the space I had requested, or perhaps they were simply at a loss for how to proceed without the usual family script to follow. Then, exactly 6 weeks after the fateful dinner, Jack showed up at my door. Unlike Brian, he hadn't called ahead. He simply appeared, looking tired and uncomfortable in his rumpled doctor scrubs. I almost didn't let him in, but curiosity won out. Once inside, he got straight to the point in the direct manner typical of our family. "Dad's having a hard time with all of this," he said. "He doesn't understand why you're making such a big deal out of one comment." I nodded, unsurprised. Dad's inability to take responsibility was part of the problem, but Jack continued surprising me. "I think I'm starting to get it after what Brian said. I've been thinking about how we all talk to you, how Dad talks about you. It's not right, Carly." I never really saw it before. His admission took me aback. Of all my family members, Jack was the last one I expected to show insight or empathy about the situation. "I should have stood up for you more," he admitted. "We all should have. It was just easier to go along with Dad's way of seeing things." We talked for over an hour. Really talked, maybe for the first time as adults. Jack shared his own struggles with our father's expectations, how even his successful medical career never quite measured up because he hadn't chosen the specialty our father thought was most prestigious. He told me about the panic attacks he suffered before family dinners, the antacids he took to get through conversations with Dad. By the time he left, something had shifted between us. We weren't just siblings bound by DNA and family obligation. We were two adults who had survived the same difficult parent, finally acknowledging the impact it had on both of us. "It's not going to be easy," Jack said at the door. "Dad's not someone who admits he's wrong, but something's changing, Carly. You started it by walking away, and now none of us can pretend anymore." As I closed the door behind him, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for the family dynamics that had hurt all of us in different ways. Hope that perhaps real change was possible, and pride in myself for having the courage to break the pattern even when it meant standing alone. The next 6 months were transformative. With the advance from my book deal, I was able to cut back on freelance work and focus on completing the final edits of my manuscript. The publishing process was exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. There were cover designs to approve, marketing plans to discuss, and endless rounds of proofreading. My editor Meredith became not just a professional contact but a mentor and friend. She believed in my book with a conviction that helped me believe in it too. "This story matters, Carly," she told me after reading the final draft. "It's going to resonate with so many people." The book, titled Invisible Daughter, was a novel about a woman discovering her voice and independence after years of emotional neglect. While not explicitly autobiographical, it drew heavily from my experiences and emotions. Writing it had been cathartic. Seeing it transform into an actual book was validating beyond anything I had experienced before. Meanwhile, my therapy with Shannon continued, and I made progress in the support group. I learned to identify patterns of negative self-talk that echoed my father's criticism. I practiced setting boundaries in smaller relationships before tackling the bigger family issues. I began to understand that my worth wasn't tied to external validation, especially not from people who were unable to see me clearly. My new apartment became truly my home. I painted the walls deep blue, hung artwork that spoke to me, and filled the bookshelves with volumes that had shaped my life and writing. For the first time, I wasn't decorating with my mother's potential criticism in mind or choosing things that would impress visitors. Every object in my space was there because it brought me joy or served a purpose in my life. I maintained my distance from my family, though Jack occasionally sent texts to check in. My mother had tried my new number a few times after getting it from Jack, but her messages still carried undercurrents of guilt and obligation rather than genuine understanding. I responded politely but briefly, maintaining the boundaries I had established. My father, true to form, made no direct attempt to contact me. According to Jack, he referred to my absence as a phase and predicted I would come around once I got over myself. His inability to consider that he might be the problem rather than me only reinforced my decision to keep my distance. 3 weeks before my book was due to be released, my publisher arranged for me to be interviewed on Literary Voices, a popular podcast about books and writing. The host, Audrey Chen, was known for her insightful questions and genuine interest in authors' journeys. The interview was scheduled to be recorded live at a bookstore in Cambridge with an audience of local book lovers. I prepared carefully for the interview, working with the publicist to anticipate questions and practice my responses. What I didn't prepare for was the audience. As I walked onto the small stage set up among the bookshelves, I scanned the crowd out of habit and froze momentarily when I spotted a familiar face. My mother was sitting in the back row, almost hidden behind a tall man in front of her. Our eyes met briefly before I forced myself to look away and focus on the interview. Audrey was warm and engaging, asking thoughtful questions about my writing process, my inspirations, and the themes of the book. I fell into an easy rhythm of responding, my nervousness fading as I talked about the work I loved. Then came a question I hadn't anticipated. "Your novel deals with family dynamics in such a nuanced way," Audrey observed. "The main character struggles with a father who can't see her authentic self and a mother who fails to protect her. How much of this is drawn from your own experience?" I hesitated, acutely aware of my mother sitting just 30 feet away. The old Carly would have deflected, offered some generic answer about imagination and creative license, but the person I had become over the past months couldn't do that. "Art often comes from our deepest truths," I said carefully. "While Invisible Daughter isn't autobiographical, the emotional landscape certainly draws from my own experiences. I know what it's like to feel unseen in your own family, to have your choices and passions dismissed as unimportant. I also know the journey toward finding your own voice and demanding the respect you deserve." I didn't look at my mother as I spoke, but I felt her presence acutely. I was speaking my truth, not just to the audience or the podcast listeners, but to her as well. It wasn't an attack or an accusation, just an honest acknowledgement of my experience. After the interview, I signed books and chatted with attendees. My mother waited until the line had dwindled before approaching the table. She looked smaller somehow, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled, as if she had dressed in a hurry. "Your father doesn't know I'm here," she said without preamble. "I saw the announcement online and came by myself." I nodded, unsure what to say. We hadn't spoken face to face since the dinner 6 months earlier. "The book sounds wonderful, Carly." She gestured to the copy in her hands. "I've always loved your writing, you know, even when I didn't say it enough." The simple admission nearly undid me. "Thank you," I managed. "That means a lot." The interview, she continued, looking down at the book rather than at me. "What you said about feeling unseen, is that really how we made you feel?" The directness of her question surprised me. "Yes," I said simply, "for as long as I can remember." She nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. "I failed you, didn't I? I should have stood up to your father more, protected you from his criticism. I just never knew how." In that moment I saw my mother clearly, perhaps for the first time. Not as the elegant, perfect wife and mother she presented to the world, but as a woman who had subjugated her own dreams and voice for so long she had forgotten how to use them. "We both made mistakes," I said gently, "but there's still time to change things if we want to." She nodded again, more firmly this time. "I'd like that, and I'm proud of you, Carly. For the book, yes, but more for having the courage to stand up for yourself, something I never managed to donastak." We didn't hug or make dramatic declarations of change, but as she left with her signed copy of my book, something had shifted between us. A door had opened just slightly to the possibility of a different kind of relationship. The following week my book was officially released. The early reviews were positive, with several notable literary blogs praising the authenticity of the narrative and the strength of the protagonist's journey. Sales were modest but respectable for a debut novel. Meredith called to tell me that a major newspaper wanted to interview me for their Sunday book section. I was riding this wave of professional accomplishment when the call came from Jack. "Dad saw your interview," he said without preamble. "Someone from his firm has a wife who listens to that podcast and mentioned it to him. He found it online and watched the whole thing." My stomach tightened. "How did he react?" "Not well," Jack admitted. "He's convinced you're trying to humiliate the family publicly. He's been ranting about ungrateful children and family loyalty." I sighed, disappointed but not surprised. Of course he would make this about him rather than considering the pain that had led to my withdrawal from the family. There's more, Jack continued. Mom confessed she went to your book signing. They had a huge fight about it. She's staying with Brian and Amanda right now. This news shocked me. In 35 years of marriage I had never known my mother to leave no matter how difficult my father became. Something significant had changed. 3 days later I received a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Dinner at the Charles restaurant this Friday at 7. All of us will be there. The message was signed simply that the first direct communication he had initiated in over 6 months. My first instinct was to refuse. I had been doing well maintaining my boundaries, focusing on my book launch, building my new life, but Shannon had been helping me prepare for an eventual confrontation with my family. Perhaps it was time. I discussed it with her in our session that week. The timing makes sense, she observed. Your book is bringing attention to family dynamics similar to yours. Your mother has taken an unprecedented stand. Your brothers have begun to question the family patterns. Your father is likely feeling his control slipping away. So you think I should go? I asked. I think you're ready, she corrected. You've done the work to know your boundaries and communicate your needs. Just remember, you can't control how they respond, only how you respond to them. Friday evening found me approaching the Charles restaurant with a mixture of dread and resolve. The restaurant was one of Boston's finest, the kind of place my father chose when he wanted to impress. A public setting, I realized, where everyone would be on their best behavior. Typical lawyer strategy. They were already seated at a round table in the back of the restaurant. My father at the center, looking distinguished but tired in his expensive suit. My mother beside him, a careful distance between them. Brian and Jack flanking them, with Amanda and Lisa completing the circle. An empty chair waited for me. As I approached, I noted the tension in their postures, the forced smiles. This was not a casual family dinner. This was an intervention, an attempt to bring the prodigal daughter back into the fold. Carly, my father, stood and extended his hand formally. Thank you for coming. I shook his hand briefly before taking my seat. The waiter appeared immediately with menus and wine offerings, a welcome distraction from the awkwardness of the reunion. Once orders had been placed and wine poured, my father cleared his throat. Your brothers tell me you've been upset about some perceived slight at our last dinner together. He emphasized the word perceived in a way that immediately set my teeth on edge. While I think your reaction was extreme, we're willing to put it behind us and move forward as a family. I took a slow sip of water, remembering Shannon's advice. Respond, don't react. I appreciate you arranging this dinner, Dad. I said carefully, but I want to clarify something. I didn't leave because of one slight at one dinner. I left because of a lifetime of being made to feel that my choices, my career, and my accomplishments weren't valuable or worthy of respect. My father's expression hardened. That's simply not true. We've always supported you. How? I asked simply. When have you ever shown genuine interest in my writing? When have you ever talked about my career with the same pride you show when discussing Brian's law practice or Jack's medical career? You're being dramatic, he dismissed. Just because I don't understand why anyone would want to write stories for a living doesn't mean I don't support you. Support isn't just financial, Dad, I countered. It's emotional. It's respect. It's acknowledging that my path, even if different from yours, has value. He waved a hand dismissively. This generation and their feelings. In my day, we didn't need constant validation. Thomas, my mother's voice was quiet but firm. Listen to what she's saying. The table fell silent. My mother rarely contradicted my father, especially in public. He turned to her, surprise evident on his face. She didn't just leave because of that dinner, my mother continued. She left because I'll say it, I failed her too. Made her feel less than. You with your constant criticism. Me with my silence. Brian and Jack by going along with it. We all let her down. Diana, my father began warningly, but she shook her head. No, Thomas, I've been thinking about this ever since I saw Carly's interview. I've read her book. She's talented, and we never acknowledged it because it didn't fit your definition of success. My father's face flushed with anger. So this is all my fault. I pushed our daughter away by not praising her enough. It wasn't just about praise, I interjected. It was about basic respect and dignity. Every family dinner became an exercise in humiliation for me. Every accomplishment dismissed, every passion belittled. Dad, Jack spoke up unexpectedly. When was the last time you read anything Carly wrote? My father looked startled. I don't have to read her work to support her. But you've read every brief I've ever written. Brian pointed out quietly. You've asked me detailed questions about my cases. You visited Jack at the hospital and asked about his procedures. Have you ever once asked Carly about her writing process or her ideas? The directness of the question left my father momentarily speechless. The waiter arrived with appetizers, creating a brief reprieve from the tension. As we began to eat, I realized something profound was happening. For the first time, my experience was being validated by the very people who had previously dismissed it. Look, my father finally said, his tone less certain. Perhaps I've been hard on you, Carly. But that's because the world is hard. I wanted you to be prepared for that. By making me feel worthless in my own family, I asked, my voice breaking slightly despite my resolve to remain composed. How does that prepare anyone for success? He looked genuinely confused, as if this perspective had never occurred to him. That wasn't my intention. But it was the result, I said firmly, and intentions don't negate impact. For the remainder of the dinner, we talked more openly than we ever had as a family. My brothers shared their own struggles with our father's expectations. My mother spoke of regrets about not pursuing her own writing career. Even my father, in his limited way, acknowledged that perhaps he had been more critical of me because he didn't understand my world the way he understood law or medicine. It wasn't a perfect resolution. My father didn't suddenly transform into a supportive, emotionally available parent. But something fundamental had shifted. The unspoken rules that had governed our family for decades had been named and questioned. The patterns were now visible to everyone, not just to me. As we prepared to leave, my father asked in a voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "So will you be coming back to Sunday dinners?" I considered my answer carefully. "Not yet," I said honestly. "I'm still healing and I need to maintain some distance while I do that. But I'm open to rebuilding our relationship on different terms. Terms that include mutual respect and real support." He nodded, clearly not entirely satisfied but accepting my decision in a way he never would have 6 months earlier. "Your book," he said awkwardly. "I'd like to read it if that's all right." I smiled slightly, recognizing the small olive branch for what it was. "I'll send you a copy." As we parted ways outside the restaurant, my mother hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything. I'm trying to be braver now." I hugged her back, feeling a complex mix of emotions. "I'm proud of you, Mom," I said, "and I love you." Driving back to Cambridge that night, I realized that the confrontation I had feared for months had actually been the beginning of healing, not just for me but potentially for my entire family. The patterns of decades wouldn't change overnight, but the silence had been broken. The pretense had been shattered, and in that truth, however uncomfortable, lay the possibility of something new and healthier for all of us. 1 year has passed since that painful family dinner when my father's joke left everyone laughing except me. 1 year since I walked away quietly, determined to protect myself from further hurt. What began as an act of self-preservation evolved into a journey of profound personal growth and family transformation that none of us could have anticipated. My book, Invisible Daughter, exceeded all expectations. What began as a modest release gained momentum through word of mouth and book club selections. The story of a woman finding her voice and demanding respect resonated with readers across the country. 6 months after publication, it hit the New York Times bestseller list and foreign rights were sold in 12 countries. The success brought validation I had longed for, but by the time it arrived, I no longer needed external approval to believe in my worth. The work I had done in therapy with Shannon, the support from my writing community, and the courage it took to stand up to my family had already given me something more valuable than commercial success. It had given me self-respect and inner peace. My relationship with my family has transformed in ways both subtle and dramatic. We no longer pretend to be perfect. We acknowledge the hurt and the patterns that caused it. We speak more honestly even when the truth is uncomfortable. My father remains my father. He still struggles to understand my world, still occasionally makes insensitive comments, but now when he does I address them directly. More importantly, so does my mother. So do my brothers. The united front that once enabled his behavior has been replaced by a commitment to honesty and mutual respect. Dad read my book grudgingly at first, then with increasing interest. He never directly discussed the parallels to our family, but he did say with characteristic understatement, "You're better at this than I realized." From him this was high praise indeed. He's trying in his way. He clips reviews of my book from newspapers and sends them to me with brief notes. "Happy for your success. Well deserved." Small acknowledgments but meaningful ones from a man who rarely admits being wrong. My mother has undergone the most dramatic transformation. After that confrontational dinner she moved back home, but with new conditions. She enrolled in a creative writing class at the local community college, rekindling the passion she had abandoned decades ago. She started therapy to address her own patterns of enabling behavior. At 70 she is discovering herself in ways she never allowed before. My brothers and I have developed relationships based on mutual respect rather than shared family mythology. Brian has scaled back his work hours after recognizing the toll his career obsession was taking on his family. Jack and I meet for coffee regularly, sharing insights from our respective therapy journeys. We support each other in setting boundaries with our parents while maintaining connection. As for me, I've moved to a larger apartment in Cambridge, one with a dedicated writing space overlooking the Charles River. I'm working on my second novel, free from the paralyzing self-doubt that once made writing so difficult. I date occasionally but prioritize my creative work and close friendships. For the first time in my life I'm not trying to fit someone else's template for success or happiness. The most profound lesson I've learned through this journey is that sometimes walking away is the most powerful act of self-love possible, not as a manipulation or punishment but as a necessary step toward healing. By removing myself from a toxic dynamic, I created space not just for my own growth but for my entire family to confront patterns that had hurt all of us in different ways. I also learned that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. I've forgiven my father for his inability to see and value me as I am. I've forgiven my mother for failing to protect me from his criticism. I've forgiven my brothers for their complicity in family patterns that diminished me. Most importantly, I've forgiven myself for seeking approval at the cost of my own well-being for so many years. But forgiveness doesn't mean returning to old patterns. It means moving forward with clear eyes and firm boundaries. It means loving people while acknowledging their limitations. It means protecting your peace without closing your heart. The family dinners have resumed, though less frequently and with different dynamics. We meet once a month at a restaurant rather than my parents' home, neutral territory where old roles are harder to slip into. Sometimes tensions flare, old patterns resurface. But now we have tools to address them honestly rather than sweeping them under the rug of family obligation. What I want you to take from my story is this. Your worth is not determined by those who cannot see you clearly. Your path doesn't need validation from people committed to misunderstanding it. And sometimes the bravest thing isn't staying. It's knowing when to walk away, and on your own terms deciding if and when to come back. Have you ever had to distance yourself from family to protect your mental health? What boundaries have you created to maintain healthy relationships with loved ones? Share your experiences in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Your support helps me continue sharing stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. Thank you for listening, and remember that choosing yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the first step toward healing, not just for you, but for everyone who truly loves you.